Hello and welcome to the Middle-earth in Mercia podcast. I'm your host Sonny and thank you for joining us. Today we've got a pretty interesting topic for today's mini episode. I've had someone approach me with a tip-off, which is a bit unusual really, it hasn't happened before. And it's about what we can expect content-wise from Games Workshop this year for the game. Now, I know there's been a big rumour circling around for quite some time about what the next supplement is going to be, but this source had a couple of other bits of information that I thought were interesting and would be good to talk about, really. So before we get started, I should probably mention I've got no way to verify these rumours, so it should all be taken with a bit of a pinch of salt, but I did think about it, and what harm does a bit of speculation about releases do? And I know you all enjoy chatting about them as much as I do. So with that, let's get into it. So first up is the one that I'm sure you've all heard, Aror and Angmar being the next supplement, and this in a couple of places has been phrased as possibly the fall of Aror. Now, I'm sure we're all familiar with the Middle-earth army factions, but the lore behind this is that Aror is the northern kingdom of the Númenóreans in Middle-earth, which was brought down by the kingdom of Angmar before the period of the War of the Ring. And they're only really restored to some degree after the succession of Aragorn or Lsar at the end of the Third Age. This is why in the films we see lots of ruins and the Weathertop. These are left over from the Fallen Kingdom, that's sort of the region they were from. And now I know there's more to the story than that, so lore masters, please forgive me, but this sort of gives us an idea of what kind of theme a supplement could entail. And we know really that we can expect two things from a supplement when it's released. And that is to receive a themed legendary legion and at least a few models to accompany it, including heroes to support those forces. So maybe we could be looking at forces themed around the fall, maybe Angmar's invasion force. Aror only has, I think, 3 available heroes, if you include the captain, 2 named heroes. So I think it would be safe to guess that they would be looking at making that list a bit longer. Now, just as important as what might be included is what do we think this would mean for the game, and are we happy with it? I know the Middle-earth team have a bit of a habit of revisiting old supplements from the Blue Book era, and this does kind of fit the trend. But I do have to say, out of the 2 left, which I believe is Shadow and Flame, which was the old Moria/Khazad-dûm one, and whatever the name for the Aror one was, for me, this kind of feels a bit of a disappointment if it comes to pass. I think for the 2 factions, especially Aror and to a lesser degree Angmar, the biggest problems with these factions is the availability of the models. And yes, I know Aror does have a big hole in its army. It's got no cavalry at all. But both forces are unique and they can very much be competitive, and we've seen that. And Angmar really is one of the stronger, more varied factions out there. It's not the worst thing in the world for Aror to possibly get a deeper roster. I would expect a return of the hard-to-get models and likely another way to play the army, because at the moment it sort of just plays as a bit of a hard-to-kill horde army. But hear me out. The Kingdom of Khazad-dûm and Moria for a long time were the dwarf models of the range, and until we got the Forge World release of the Iron Hills, they were the dwarf models. And I think it's a real shame that the only time we see them at tournaments and sometimes even in casual play is when players of culture play them for fun, or when we see specific rules packs or at the hands of a very skilled player. As a faction, they're just not competitive when you compare them to sort of the top varied lists like Mordor, Isengard and Minas Tirith and so on, despite having a fairly deep roster. And I don't mean that the dwarves are useless. I'm just saying that, you know, they're not gonna make it up there with the best of them. When you've got 2 good players and one of them's a dwarf player most of the time is probably going to have a hard time. And I really think giving dwarf players through a supplement, either with extra models or a legendary legion, an answer to some of the issues they have, like, for instance, mobility. And I think that could be easily done. That's a topic for another video, but I think it could be easily done. It could make dwarves massively more viable, and as a bigger effect, would massively change the meta of the game. I don't think a supplement for the fall of Arnor will really have that kind of effect on the meta, other than people trying out what's new and old models being restocked in store. Like, we still see lots of Angmar, and the only reason we don't see lots of Arnor is that the models are next to impossible to get hold of. So they're both good factions, and I don't see anything changing other than the prominence of them being on involved in conversations because it's new, and the models being available. Now, on to the next tip I've been given, and I think this is more interesting than the last, as this is the only place I've heard of it. And that is that we may be getting new plastic Boromir and Lsar models, both of which I think could be really exciting. Now, my source didn't say whether this was Boromir of the White Tower or not, but I am going to assume that it is, as I think this is the most commonly used version of the model. Now, I know both of these models have readily available metal kits, but I've recently for the first time built and painted some of the new plastic hero kits, and design choices aside on some of them, I think it really is a joy to have models with such a high degree of detail and fidelity. And these really are two of the biggest heroes in the game. So if this happens, I really do think it is a great thing that could encourage more players to take these two immensely powerful named heroes. So what do you guys think on this? Are you happy with these potential re-releases? Do you think that these models have aged well and there's other key models that are more in need of love? I heard a lot of those comments when Elrond was re-released. Yeah, it's great, but we had a decent model already. Now, finally, let's wrap this all together. Last month, we had Games Workshop release this image with a confirmation that a new supplement is coming, likely in the second half of the year. Now, to go back to the big rumour that this could easily be a resin Arnor rider, if we were to do that, though, if that is what was to be released, I think the Warriors would look massively out of spec compared to it, which I think would likely mean this could lead to a total resin re-release of the Arnor range, moving them from a near impossible faction to get a hold of to a near impossible faction to afford. Because Arnor currently, at least, is a numbers game, if they go that route, to be honest, I can hear the 3D printers powering up already. And to me, it looks unlikely that this could be Lsar's horse, as it doesn't match the old design or the movies, which they do tend more or less to stick to. Unless, of course, they've chosen to totally step away from it. But could this be a redesigned Boromir? Maybe. I think that's a possibility. Could this be the King of Arnor? Maybe again. I think the hero releases are more exciting for me personally than the idea that Arnor, like this is a Arnor Horseman, because I think that inevitably means that there's a whole range re-released in the formerly Forge World resin, which I think just is almost as irrelevant for most players as not being able to get hold of the models. I think the people that can't get hold of the models now are 3D printing, and the people that wouldn't want to pay those kind of prices would continue to 3D print or buy from suppliers that do them. So I think that would be a bit disappointing, really. But there we go. That's all of sort of the rumours and tips I've been given. If you want to join the conversation and have thoughts on this year's possible releases, please do make sure to leave a comment or email us at middleearthinmercia@gmail.com or message us on the Facebook or Instagram. And if you are a Spotify or YouTube listener, you may have noticed that this is also a video-supported podcast episode. And don't worry if you are a regular listener. We will always remain primarily an audio podcast, but I would like to add to our content with video when it's useful. So if you'd like to support our video efforts as we look at new equipment, please do head over to our Buy Us a Coffee, or in our case it's branded Buy Us a Beer, and drop something in our tip jar. We're always massively thankful when people do so, and we'd like to take this opportunity to say a special thank you to Guy Halliday for again donating as a supporter. Anyway, that is enough from me today. We will be returning soon with a cracking tournament report. I've just been waiting on Ash's availability, and we will be replying to all the messages and replies we've had in that full episode. So again, thank you for listening. Keep hobbying, and we will see you soon.